Simplify Focus Live. United States Congressman John Faso, representing New York's 19th Congressional District, on the phone, and as is Ed Kowalski, EA Workforce Solutions. And Ed Kowalski, and for the benefit of Congressman Faso, your firm represents 100-plus clients and about 2,000 employees with somewhere around $80 million in payroll. Is that reasonably accurate?
That's correct.
Okay, and so you were asking Congressman Faso about these employer mandates. If you could just very quickly summarize.
No. Like I said, I mean, one of the things that Congressman Faso voted in the affirmative for was the Working Families Flexibility Act of 2017, and on face value, that bill basically is allowing employers to enter into voluntary agreements with their employees to allow to grant them comp time instead of time and a half for overtime. Now, that bill's working its way through the Senate, and it's a feel-good piece of legislation. I get people wanting to be able to give people the flexibility of wanting to be able to grant comp time. Yes. My problem with this is, once again, the regulatory burden. If this passes in the Senate and signed into law, the regulatory burden that this act puts into effect on employers, on top of all the other regulatory mandates that employers are dealing with in New York State, is yet again another anchor.
Yes.
Let me finish one point. What if all employers wanted comp time on a Monday? And that shut down a manufacturing facility because they didn't know how to manage that. I mean, I don't think it was thought through, John.
Okay.
So here's Ed described what the legislation is. It would have to be a voluntary agreement between the employer and the employee, or the employee organization or union if there was a collective bargaining agreement. And it would not, the employer would still be able to direct when the comp time was taken. But here's the overriding point, Ed, is that I don't believe this legislation, if it becomes law, would have an impact in New York State, because I think state law supersedes this, and because of state law requirements. It's a national piece of legislation, but state law, which might be contrary, is not preempted. So New York state law requires that overtime be paid if someone works more than 8 hours in a day. And I would like to see more flexibility. I certainly would like to see the regulatory flexibility for employers. Many of the new mandates that have come in to play from Albany in recent years have been very burdensome. But so this legislation is simply attempting to allow an employee to use comp time, to receive comp time in lieu of the overtime if they so chose and if the employer agreed. But the employee wouldn't be able to say, well, I'm going to take all my comp time on Monday. It's intended to allow flexibility for the employee. If, for instance, they have a sick relative, they have a sick child, they would be able to bank some of that comp time so that they could take time off when they had a family emergency or a family illness, etc. That's what the intention is. But again, I don't believe that this actually would supersede New York law, because New York law, this legislation doesn't preempt, overturn contrary state laws.
So let's leave it right there on that one for now, but I certainly would like to delve into this and find out the specifics of it. And Congressman John Faso on the phone with me. Congressman Faso, before we run out of time here, tax reform. I mean, certainly repeal of the Affordable Care Act and coming up with a way to care for those who have chronic illnesses, critically important, but a tax reform that does, in fact, promote fairness. Where do we stand? Any talk at all about a form of flat tax or fair tax?
The legislation that I expect to come out, and there are two sides to this. One is the corporate side and one is the individual side. I don't think we're going to see a flat tax. I think you're going to see a flattening of the brackets. So you might have a 3-bracket system on the personal side, and the look is, or the attempt is to reduce the corporate tax rate, which the U.S. corporate tax rate is among the highest in the world at 35%. And many corporations, many large corporations, don't pay that. They may pay much less because of exemptions and deductions and exclusions. So the idea is to simplify the code, lower the rate, eliminate a lot of those exemptions and exclusions so everyone pays something, but make our U.S. corporate tax rate more competitive with other competitor nations around the world, And the president proposed reducing it to 15%. That is probably, from my analysis of the financial impact of that probably is too far. Anything in the low 20s would be a great improvement over the existing system. And we've got to stop this incentive that exists in the current tax code for companies to keep overseas profits abroad, because if they take them home, they get double taxed on them. So we've got to end that unitary tax system, as it's called, and move to a more territorial tax system. So the company, a U.S. company doing business abroad, only gets taxed where it makes the profit. It shouldn't be taxed twice if it brings that money home, because frankly, right now it's a disincentive for the GEs and the Caterpillars and the Boeings and the Googles and companies like that, and our pharmaceutical companies, to bring their foreign profits home to invest here or pay them out in dividends. So that's what we've got to accomplish in this tax code debate. I was in a meeting just the other day with the Secretary of the Treasury, a meeting of about 15 or 20 Congress members, and we had a lot of talk about different aspects of the proposals.
So to this point, several thoughts come to my mind. First of all, in this country, more than a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. Most people seem to have forgotten that back around 2008, we grew the size of the federal budget. It was supposed to be a one-time stimulus of $900 billion. And we took the federal budget from $2.7 to $3.6 trillion. And then Harry Reid, Nancy Pelosi set that as the baseline budget. We have run these massive deficits ever since. Is there any talk about scaling back on the spending side? The government's taking in record revenue and yet still outspending it every year.
Yeah, and the projection is that the deficits are going to start growing. They had a few years where they were declining in the last 3 or 4 years. The deficits are going to start growing. And here's the shocker, Tom. Hope you're sitting down. We have a $19 trillion national debt.
Yes.
That's our debt. That's
Yes.
our mortgage payment as a country, okay? It is scheduled by 2029, just 10 years from now, or I'm sorry, that's 12 years from now, it's scheduled by 2029 to be $29 trillion.
Yes.
So it is an enormous increase that we're going to see in the national debt. That gigantic mortgage payment that right now is about $65,000, $70,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country. And the annual deficit, the imbalance between our revenue and our spending, is slated to go up. So we're looking at a deficit this year of about $550 billion.
Yes.
But the debt, $19 trillion and counting right now. So I'm on the Budget Committee. We have had some extraordinarily tough and difficult meetings talking about how we get mandatory spending in the federal government under control. Right now, the mandatory spending items are things like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest on the debt. And let me throw one other shocking number at you and your listeners. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, advised us that if long-term interest rates go up by just a point, that's over $1 trillion in new debt service payment over 10 years that we've got to pay. Just an increase in long-term interest rates of a point, it's over $1 trillion over 10 years in additional interest payments on our existing debt. So this has got to end, and we've got to, number one, grow the economy, and that's why the reform of the banking laws and getting the small business economy and the large business economy moving, fixing Dodd-Frank, fixing the healthcare system, doing the important work of tax reform and regulatory reform. Those things are the things that are necessary to get the economy moving, because if we can get the economy growing at over 3% annually instead of 1.6 or 1.9% that it is now, that means tremendous amounts of new revenue coming in to the government, which means it's easier to pay down, to eliminate those annual deficits and to start paying down our debt.
Well said. And so, Congressman Faso, I'm going to let you drop off at this point in time, but I'd like to make these, as we talked about in the past, some kind of ongoing series of conversations and, get the grown-ups around the table and understand that every single thing that we've talked about this morning, there are multiple facets to it. And one person's benefit may be some other person's loss, and we have to reconcile those differences if we're going to move this country forward.
Tom, thank you very much, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you and your listeners. And I would just remind people, go to my official website,
yes.
Faso.House.Gov, sign up for emails and information, and if you've got a constituent issue or a complaint or a suggestion, that's a way you can also shoot it into us. So really appreciate your time. I wish everyone well, and look forward to seeing people over the Memorial Day holiday and recess that we'll have here as we remember all of those who paid the ultimate sacrifice for our country.
Excellent. And Congressman Faso, when we speak again, I would like to put on one of the topics for discussion, monetary policy, because it relates so closely to what you just said about the growing debt and deficits.
Thank you.
You're welcome. 848 Hudson.